Hey juniors, good to see you today. It is Wednesday, let's see here, April 22nd. I'm filming this on Tuesday night, so I always get a little confused. I'm coming at you here with a couple, actually 3 friends. My dog Riley. Riley, say hi. Riley decided to join us. Chapman and Cheney are watching a movie in the other room, and I'm trying to separate the dogs. And then, of course, Woody has been sitting over in the corner for a few days and decided to bring him into the conversation. He may have something he would like to add to our discussion today. You never know. And then, of course, Captain America. And let's see, the most recent Avengers show that I watched was Guardians of the Galaxy. It was really good. Quirky little group. My favorite character is I Am Groot. That was great. All right, so I have something to show you. It's beaten up and torn up, but I don't know if you guys can see that. It is the White House Cookbook. This actually was the edition of the White House Cookbook that was in the White House when Woodrow Wilson was president during World War I. It was written or compiled by his wife Edith. And so Mrs. Lefevre came across this, and it seems like maybe it was in her mom's possession and she got it when her mom moved. But anyway, she passed it on to me. I needed to get it, the binding and everything fixed, but like it is like seriously falling apart. So anyway, I wanted to show that to you guys. Here we go. Okay, so today we are going to turn the page from, oh my goodness, this book is falling apart. A bunch of the pages just fell apart, literally. There we go. We are going to turn the page from World War I, and we are going to press on to a discussion about how the Roaring Twenties bled into the Great Depression. And so that's kind of our big next significant event. So if you are hopefully staying on top of this, we will have a test when we're finished with several different topics and people. So make sure that you are tracking. I always encourage you guys to make copies of the PowerPoint, print them out, the parts that have text on them. Anything that I say in the lectures is up for grabs. And then, you know, use that to write out your notes or whatever, and then keep those together so that you have something to study. I probably will also send you the PowerPoints in one grouping again, but we've only got, let's see, we've got I think we've got 3 weeks after this, so we are getting close to the end. So I know you guys are ready. I would like to also give you guys some suggestions about the Google Docs and all of that. So I have about 65 kids I've got to keep track of on Google Classroom, and between recording these videos and preparing lessons in a shortened format, not having access to stuff at school, trying to record and make sure everybody's turning stuff in on time, I am loopy. And so my only way to know if you guys have done what you were supposed to do is if you turn in those Google Docs that have, I watched the video, I watched or looked at the PowerPoint or whatever. If you do all of those things and then you forget to turn in the Google Doc, all I know is that it's missing, and I just assume that you haven't done it. So if you forget to turn in the Google Doc, you do the assignment and you forget to turn it in, just shoot me an email or a message and say, hey, Mrs. Campbell, I did this on time. I totally forgot to turn this in. I'm not going to count it late. I mean, that's not who I am. So don't be like, no, if it's a quiz or a test, that's different. It needs to be done when I say to do it. I always want you to strive to get things accomplished when the due date says to be due. And part of the reason I'm doing that is for my own sanity. Having people send me messages at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, or submitting their assignments and my phone is bling, bling, bling with the notifications on at 2 in the morning, such and such has finished their assignment. That's not good for anybody. So we've just got 3 more weeks to go. Try to work with me, try to turn things in when they're supposed to be turned in. But if for some reason you forget to turn it in and you do it on time, just let me know and I will change that grade in RunWeb. if you turn in a quiz 2 minutes late, I'm not gonna be like, oh, that's bad. You guys know me better than that. That's not who I am. So show me a little grace. I'm doing my best. I am maxing out the can. You know, I'm burning the midnight oil, as they say. Some days are harder than others. Your particular days are difficult for me because I have to plan a whole lesson for APUSH. That is completely different than what I'm teaching you guys. So I'm like, so anyway, if you would just kind of bear with me on that, I would greatly appreciate it. Okay, opportunity for some extra credit. I'm going to ask you guys a question right now, and hopefully you started this video when you were supposed to. And I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to go to your Google Classroom, and on the streaming, the live stream, or the public comment stream on the front, the main part of Google Classroom, I'm not sure what it's called, but it says public comments on it. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to put your best answer in that public comment, and I'm going to actually be sitting here on my computer watching to see who puts in their answers first. And the first few that put their answers in is going to get extra credit, okay? All right, so I've got to think of an extra credit question. Oh, I have one. Okay. What was your favorite part of the Canberry chocolate ad with the World War I soldiers on Christmas Day? What was your favorite part of that ad, that video ad that you watched that reenacted a real Christmas Day event in the trenches in France in 1914? What was your favorite part of that ad? Okay, ready, set, go to Google Classroom and put it in the public comments there so we can all see it, and I will check it. And the first few is going to get extra credit, okay? So you can stop the video and go do that, okay? We're pretending that it stopped. Okay, you're back now. Okay, I will check that out and let you know what the best answers are and who gets the extra credit. All right, with that said, we're going to jump into our lesson today. You didn't have any homework. That movie, apparently in the years past, what was it called? Anyway, I can't even remember the name of it now. Wow. It's 10:45 and I'm tired. Gosh, what was it called? Something Angels. Anyway, I have shown parts of it in the past, and it actually does a great job of showing what some of the women went through that fought in the suffragette movement to get women the right to vote. But there were a couple scenes that I kind of forgot about, or I never showed, I guess. And so I just didn't feel comfortable having you guys watching that at home. So no big deal. But I will tell you that part of the movie portrays several of those women were arrested, and they decided to go on a hunger strike and to draw attention to the situation. Actually, they were trying to get President Wilson to support Congress opening up a proposition to the 19th Amendment, or to the 19th Amendment. And President Wilson was resisting, partly because he didn't really, I don't think, wanted women to have the right to vote, but also because the war was going on. And so he was ignoring them. And so several of them were protesting in front of the White House, and they got arrested for like public display or something, I don't know, breaking some sort of civil law. They weren't doing anything wrong, but they were arrested and they were taken to jail, and they did this hunger strike, and there were dozens of them. And eventually the jail warden ordered that they be force-fed. And so feeding tubes were forced down their throats, and they were fed that way for days and days and days. And it was horrible. The movie portrays it, and it was absolutely horrible. Eventually, word got out what was happening. They were treated horribly. That kind of got them some attention, and eventually President Wilson agreed to support the 19th Amendment, and it went out to the states for a vote, and finally in 1919 women gained the right to vote. So that part of the movie was really good. But anyway, all that said, we're leaving World War I in the rearview mirror, and we're just going to real briefly talk about the Roaring Twenties, and then how that is connected to the Great Depression. So those two significant, I'll call them eras in American history, are super important. And then of course we'll talk about some other things. I'll leave it a secret where we're going next. But so if you have your computer in front of you, I would encourage you to do this on a split screen. Watch the PowerPoint or watch the video while you're looking at the PowerPoint. Okay, I'm in the wrong PowerPoint. So, all right, so the presidents. All right, so the presidents, when Woodrow Wilson died, I'm trying to think who became president. Oh, there he is. Okay. Warren G. Harding became president. Warren G. Harding was kind of described as a Bill Clinton. He looked like a politician. He acted like a politician. He had a reputation for being a bit of a womanizer. He was a handsome guy, knew how to work the crowd. And he ended up having a heart attack while he was president. He was one of the few presidents that died in office. And his vice president was a little tiny, quirky guy by the name of Calvin Coolidge. Almost looked like a comic strip character. I'm thinking of Calvin and Hobbes, I guess. But little tiny guy from, I think he was from Vermont, maybe. He was the quintessential 1920-ish Republican, conservative Republican, and didn't believe in government intervention, didn't believe in taxes, to each his own, every man make their own way. And he was at the helm, he was at the steering wheel as America entered the 1920s, a time of great prosperity, economic prosperity, rapid industrialization. America is becoming a consumer-based economy, or mass consumption of consumer goods. Stock market is going through the roof. People are purchasing their own vehicles. The middle class is developing. This is the era of the Great Gatsby, Prohibition, speakeasies, the mafia, basically just money flying around everywhere. And Calvin Coolidge was the man at the helm. And so most people associate the Roaring Twenties with Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge is, I believe he was his Secretary of State, maybe? Or no. Secretary of the Treasury. I can't remember. Anyway, Herbert Hoover was on Calvin Coolidge's cabinet, and Herbert Hoover is going to become the next president. Now, what Herbert Hoover didn't realize was that underneath this time of economic prosperity, America was about to take the biggest economic stumble and tumble into the abyss that it had ever experienced. There was going to be mass unemployment, mass poverty, desperate times for a country where there was no safety net, there was no unemployment, there was no Medicaid, there was none of that. People had to make do for themselves, and Herbert Hoover assumes that his presidency is going to be affluent like the time of Calvin Coolidge, but unfortunately that is not going to happen. So I'm going to zip through the Roaring Twenties really quick. Just to give you kind of a context, this was an era where what they call Fordism. It was a time of assembly line production, mass production, mass consumption. Henry Ford was iconic during this time frame. Americans bought cars like we do today. Probably not, a car for every person in the family, but every family had a car. Urban neighborhoods, or they call it the urban sprawl. Outside of the neighborhoods, you have the suburbs pop up where everybody's purchasing homes, everybody is purchasing cars, and to accommodate that, companies are being built that create roads and pavements and highway systems. Gasoline stations pop up along the way to service the cars that are going from the burbs to the cities. People are taking vacations outside their normal places that they grew up in years past. People, when they went on vacation, they stayed at the cabin at the pond around the corner. They didn't go to another state, to another place. They just rested. So this was a time that was very different. It was a time of vacation, spending that extra money, traveling outside of people's places of birth. Motels would pop up along these highways that were built to accommodate these cars and these people who were traveling on vacation and that sort of thing. So it was a time of great abundance, a time of great freedom, a time that we're used to, and right now in the midst of this crazy pandemic thing we're going through feels very restrictive. When somebody says, oh, you can't go to work, you can't do this, just go fishing. I'm like, but I want to go to the mall. I want to go to the movies. I want to, go on a road trip to California if I want to, but I can't. And so this time in American history in the 20s was very much like what is normal for us. Some of the icons of the 1920s were Charles Lindbergh, flew across the Atlantic solo in an airplane. Babe Ruth, The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby in the Jazz Age. Al Capone becomes notorious during this era. Boxing was huge during this era. Probably the most famous boxer was heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey. Millions of people gathered around their radios, which was the main form of entertainment during this era, to listen to these boxing matches. This is when Amelia Earhart empowered women with her flying. I can't remember what year she disappeared, but she became famous during the 1920s. The flappers came on the scene. Women who were throwing out the dress code. They were chopping off their hair. They were showing their necks. They were showing their ankles. They were showing their bare shoulders in their little flapper outfits. They were going to the speakeasies, and they were essentially partying and drinking and just expressing themselves in a way they had been unable to previous to this. Prohibition was a pretty significant part of the 20s. And so the people that were partying like this were doing it illegally. They were called speakeasies because they were generally hidden bars and clubs and dance places where oftentimes black jazz bands would come in and play for them. And they were supposed to speak easy, to be quiet so that nobody would know what was happening. And of course, people knew what was happening. Billy Sunday, who was a former baseball player, famous man, converted, became a Christian, and he was a traveling evangelist during this time. He was real popular. Let's see here. These are some of the things that are synonymous with the Roaring Twenties. President Coolidge was a big pro-business president, and so business growth was greatly encouraged. Small business growth was encouraged. Entrepreneurship was encouraged. President Coolidge believed in small government. He thought government should not get involved. He believed in lower taxes, like I mentioned before, and all of these things are associated with the Roaring Twenties. But there was unfortunately, a problem brewing below the surface that most people didn't know about. So Americans were living on credit. They were consuming these goods, these products, everything from household appliances to cars. They were buying refrigerators on credit. I kind of chuckle about that now, but people still do that. They go to Rent-A-Center and they rent a television. They were certainly buying cars oftentimes on credit. And they were extending themselves beyond what they were capable of doing. In most cases, it was still one parent was working, one working person in each family. Generally the husband, sometimes the women would work as well. But when Calvin Coolidge left office, there were lots of things brewing below the surface that economists just were not aware of. Another big problem was that a lot of the countries that owed America money from World War I were not paying us, or they were unable to pay us. And so the rest of the world was going through an economic slump while America was experiencing this boom. And that is definitely going to contribute to the rug getting pulled out from underneath us. Excuse me. What else? Let me see here. Let's see here. How shall I place this? I'm going to list the 4 things that most historians say are the causes of the Great Depression. So Calvin Coolidge leaves office. Let me see when he leaves office in 1929. So he serves from 1923 to 1929. He finishes out Warren G. Harding's term, and then he's reelected. Herbert Hoover becomes president, bless his heart, let's see, it would be March of 1929. And of course, if you know anything about history, you know what's going to happen in about 6 months. And so the causes of the Great Depression coming out of the Roaring Twenties is tariff and war debt policies that had cut down on the foreign market for American goods. So essentially, that's fancy words for saying there was no foreign market for American goods. we depend, even today, we depend on the world consuming our goods that we sell them. Even our farmers depend on, like, for instance, China consuming American farm goods. The fact that the world is dealing with the coronavirus right now and don't have purchasing power is really hurting the American farmer right now. Tariff policies as well. And so the fact that we don't have markets to sell to was one contributing cause to the Great Depression. There was a crisis in the farm sector as a result of this. American farmers had upped their ability to produce goods to support the world food needs during World War I. And suddenly the war is over and they have to kind of withdraw or pull back in, and they have purchased farm equipment, they have purchased land, they have an overabundance of food. And so whenever you have more supply than you have demand, the price of your goods drastically drops. And so during this time, there was a great crisis in the farm sector that kind of caught everybody off guard. The availability of easy credit, as I said before, Americans were buying these goods on credit. And there was still, coming out of the progressive era, there was still an unequal distribution of income. There was still a significant poor class of people and a significant wealthy class of people. And so the wealthy were investing their money in the stock market. And they were borrowing money to buy stock. So they didn't have the money to buy the stock. They were essentially going to a bank or a lender and saying, I need this much money to buy this stock, and they would go and purchase the stock kind of on debt, on a loan sort of shortfall. And so when the stock market crashed, they had to pay those debts, and they had no money to do it because they had borrowed the money to buy the stock. And so you have all these wealthy people that suddenly, at the snap of a finger, lost everything. And they were the business people, they were the industrialists, they were the job producers. And so, again, war debt policies that cut down on foreign markets for American goods, a crisis in the farm sector, the availability of easy credit, and the unequal distribution of income, and the fact that the rich people are about to jump off a cliff, literally. And so on a day called Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929, the American stock market literally collapsed. Men who had purchased these stocks on loan were jumping out of buildings. They were committing suicide. They were leaving their families in despair. As a result of that, people were running to the banks to pull all their money out because they were scared they were going to lose everything. Banks collapsed. Most of you guys probably know this, but most banks, the way that they make money is they charge interest on some of the things that you do, that generally they take your investment and they go and invest it in other things like real estate or businesses or to ventures they think will make them money. So for instance, if everybody in this class had a bank account at Arvest Bank and everybody in this class decided they wanted to go pull all their money out of Arvest Bank wouldn't have enough money to give you because they're using some of that money as investment. They would have to call upon someone above them, probably Walmart, and say, hey, everybody in our bank wants their money right now. We need money. And so banks and businesses failed left and right during the Great Depression after the stock market crashed. Between 1929 and 1932, 400,000 farms went into foreclosure, which basically means they lost their farms. 1 in every 4 American workers lost their job. That's an unemployment rate that hovered between 25 and 30%. And because the U.S. economy collapses, it spreads essentially to the entire world. And the entire world falls into a depression in the years after the Roaring Twenties. All right, let me zip through here. President Hoover was taken off guard. He was similar to Calvin Coolidge. He believed government shouldn't get involved. The economy will fix itself. We just need to wait it out. He definitely wasn't a Donald Trump. He believed that the role of government was to encourage the best of circumstances, but not to control the circumstances. He believed the economy would fix itself. He encouraged private charities and organizations to contribute and help in ways that they could, whether it be food kitchens or helping the needy. Ultimately, over the course of his 4 years in office, and he was only president for 4 years because he couldn't fix the problem, things continued to get worse and worse and worse. He did invest in a couple of programs. One of them is what was called the Boulder Dam is now called Hoover Dam. If you've been to Hoover Dam in Nevada, it's an incredible project, but it put a lot of people to work, helped with some water issues out in the Nevada area. But unfortunately for him, there was no fix in this economy. It wasn't just America, it was the whole world. And so just like, again, I hate to keep comparing it to the coronavirus situation, but what's happening in America today with the pandemic is not just happening in America. As you know, it's happening all around the world. In some ways, it kind of makes it feel a little bit easier to tolerate, but in other ways, it has more of a far-reaching effect because our economy is intertwined with other economies in the world and vice versa. So what impacts China impacts us and vice versa. And the same thing was happened during the Great Depression. So the Great Depression lasted from about 1929 when the stock market crashed to about 1939 when America entered World War II. We're not going to go into too much detail about what happened with Franklin Roosevelt. He introduced a program called the New Deal in the years from 1933 or 4 until World War II that tried to stimulate the economy. Honestly, it probably hurt the economy. What got America out of the 10-year, the long decade, the horrible decade, was World War II and production and manufacturing for military goods. That is what kicked the American economy back on track. It wasn't all of the government intervention, even if that's what we want to think. That's not what got the economy fixed. So we go from the 1920s, this time of great economic consumption, to 10 years of just horrible, horrible situation in the United States. People were living in cardboard boxes. People were living in their cars. People were renting out hallways in their houses to renters, trying to make a little bit of money. People were growing their own foods, their gardens. They were raising chickens. So some of our neighbors do that already. I don't know if your neighbors do, but my neighbors do. I've got some neighbors down the street that have some roosters that I hear sometimes they get out of their yard. I live in a neighborhood too, so it's kind of interesting. These shanty towns became known as Hoovervilles after President Hoover. It just was a really, really bad time, and President Hoover could do nothing about it. So bless his heart. And things will only continue to get worse. But I would like for you guys to watch the president's video on both Calvin Coolidge and President Hoover. I'll give you the link to that. And so when you finish listening to my lecture, I want you just to watch those two presidential videos. And then you do have one just short homework assignment. You can do it with this lesson if you want to. You'll probably have time. Or you can do it over the weekend. I want you to read chapter 22, section 2, which is about the Great Depression. It's called Hardships and Suffering During the Depression. One of the other elements of that probably lengthened the Great Depression were the dust storms and dust bowls that hit, the drought that hit the Midwest during the same decade. The Midwest had been over-farmed, and the natural grasses and trees were taken down for farmers, and there was no natural barrier to some of the drought created these dust storms, and there was no barrier to stop them. And so these dust storms would moved all the way into New York Harbor. I have a picture that you'll see on here. So that was another contributing factor to the situation in the Depression. I don't know if I have this picture in here. No, I don't. There's lots and lots of actually Franklin Roosevelt hired photographers to essentially document the situation in America during the Depression, partly to give them jobs, but for the historical narrative, so history could show how difficult things were. And there's some pictures in the PowerPoint of those circumstances as well. And so we're not going to spend any time other than what you're going to read and what you're going to see on video about Franklin Roosevelt's period as president during the Great Depression. We're just kind of look at it as a whole, and that President Hoover was at the helm in the very beginning of it, and the causes of the Great Depression, and some of the things that happened as a result of it. But what I do want you to understand is that the Depression did not end as a result of government intervention. The Great Depression ended because of World War II, because of the need for putting people to work to build the greatest Navy and Air Force that the world has ever seen, on a mass scale, and that kick-started our economy in 1939, 1940. But the decade of the 1920s was horrible, and if you've ever talked to anybody that lived through them, great-grandparents or otherwise, it was a desperate time where people literally sometimes would eat dog food for food, because there was nothing else. It was a terrible time, and I'm glad that today, when we go through struggles, we do have a safety net that can help us get through those tough times without getting to desperate measures. So that is my lesson for today. It's short and sweet. I say it's short and sweet. It's 30 minutes. So please leave here, go watch, not leave here, but once you turn off this lecture, I want you to watch the president's videos on Calvin Coolidge and Herbert Hoover. And then either at the end of that, you can read this 2 or 3 pages on chapter 22, or you can do that in the weekend prior to class on Monday. And make sure that you read it. You will want to I'm not going to say why, but just make sure that you read it. Okay, so it's chapter 22 again. Chapter 22, section 2, pages 678 to, 683, sorry, 678 to 683. And the title of it is Hardship and Suffering During the Depression. So anyway, see you guys later. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye.